confrontation. Italy had demonstrated that a determined aggressor could act with near impunity, and the League of Nations' promises to stop international bullying were revealed to be largely hollow. Britain and France, exhausted from the memory of the First World War and wary of provoking another, hesitated to respond forcefully. Their inaction emboldened both Mussolini and Hitler, signaling that bold territorial expansion might go largely unchecked. By the late 1930s, Europe and Asia were on a collision course. Germany, Italy, and Japan, all dissatisfied with the post-World War I settlement, were quietly plotting their next moves, each exploiting the weaknesses and indecision of the supposed guardians of peace. Economic crises, nationalist fervor, and militaristic ambition combined into a volatile mixture that no treaty or league could restrain. September 1, 1939, would mark the first explosive expression of these tensions when German troops, emboldened by years of rearmament and unchecked expansion, thrust into Poland. The blitzkrieg was swift, precise, and devastating, demonstrating that the lessons of the First World War and the failures of the League of Nations had been ignored at humanity's peril. Europe had once again hurtled toward conflict, not from a single misstep, but from years of cumulative inaction, ambition, and unresolved grievances. The invasion of Poland triggered a chain reaction. Britain and France, honoring their guarantees to Polish sovereignty, declared war on Germany on September 3, 1939. Yet their initial efforts were halting and cautious, a period that would come to be known as the Phony War, as the Western Front saw little action, while Germany consolidated its position in the East. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union, having signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact with Hitler just weeks earlier, moved to occupy eastern Poland, claiming it as a sphere of influence. Poland was carved between two powers in a shocking display of realpolitik, and millions of civilians faced occupation, persecution, and forced displacement. As winter approached, Germany turned its attention westward. In April 1940, the Nazis launched a lightning invasion of Denmark and Norway, securing strategic ports and iron ore routes vital for their war machine. By May, the blitzkrieg rolled into Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. France, caught off guard and still relying on outdated strategies from the First World War, fell with alarming speed. Paris was occupied by June, and the French government was forced to surrender, establishing the collaborationist Vichy regime. Across the English Channel, Britain prepared for the fight of its life. Winston Churchill, who had replaced Neville Chamberlain as Prime Minister in May 1940, became the symbol of defiance. Despite relentless German bombing raids, in what became known as the Battle of Britain, the Royal Air Force and the resolve of the British people prevented a full-scale invasion. Hitler's failure to subdue Britain marked the first significant setback for the Nazi war machine. While Europe burned, the Axis powers expanded elsewhere. Italy, now firmly allied with Germany, invaded Greece and North Africa, attempting to carve out an empire of its own. Japan continued its campaigns across China and the Pacific, gradually tightening its grip on Southeast Asia. By 1941, the world was no longer at the edge of war, it was fully engulfed. In June 1941, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in human history. Targeting the Soviet Union, millions of German troops poured across the vast Eastern Front, aiming to crush Stalin's forces before winter set in. The brutality was unprecedented, with both military and civilian populations suffering horrific losses. Yet, despite initial successes, the Soviet Union's resilience and the vastness of its territory turned the tide, foreshadowing the long, grueling war to come. The conflict was no longer regional. In December 1941, Japan's surprise attack on Pearl Harbor brought the United States fully into the war, transforming it into a truly global conflict. Industrial might, technological innovation, and sheer manpower now joined the struggle, tipping the balance toward eventual Allied victory, but at an unimaginable cost. World War II had become the culmination of unresolved grievances, unchecked aggression, and failures of diplomacy that had stretched across decades. From the ashes of the First World War, a new and far deadlier conflagration had arisen, reshaping the world forever. By 1942, the war had reached a global scale, with each theater of conflict exacting a devastating toll. In North Africa, the British Eighth Army, under generals like Bernard Montgomery, clashed repeatedly with Rommel's Afrika Korps. The desert campaigns were brutal, marked by long, exhausting marches, sandstorms, and relentless tank battles. Control of the Suez Canal and access to Middle Eastern oil made the stakes extraordinarily high, with both sides vying for supremacy. Meanwhile, on the Eastern Front, the German advance into the Soviet Union met fierce resistance. Cities like Leningrad and Stalingrad became symbols of human endurance. The siege of Leningrad lasted nearly 900 days, during which starvation, disease, and relentless bombardment claimed the lives of over 1 million civilians. In Stalingrad, the winter of 1942-1943 would become a turning point. Encircled by the Red Army, the German Sixth Army surrendered, marking the first major decisive defeat for Hitler's forces and shifting momentum toward the Allies. In the Pacific, Japan's early victories gave way to a protracted struggle against the United States and its allies. The Battle of Midway in June 1942 was pivotal. American forces, breaking Japanese codes, ambushed and sank 4 of Japan's aircraft carriers. This shifted naval dominance in the Pacific, and the Allies began a grueling island-hopping campaign, slowly reclaiming territory and pushing toward Japan's home islands dot across Europe. 1943 saw the beginning of the Allied strategic bombing campaign. Cities like Hamburg, Dresden, and Berlin were targeted in an effort to cripple Germany's industrial capacity and morale. While the bombings were controversial for their human cost, they reflected the total war approach that now defined the conflict. In Italy, Mussolini's regime began to crumble. Following the Allied invasion of Sicily in July 1943, Italy capitulated, though German forces quickly occupied the country, turning it into another deadly battleground. The Italian campaign dragged on, a series of grueling mountain and urban battles that tested the patience and endurance of both soldiers and civilians. By 1944, the Western Allies were ready to open a second front. On June 6, 1944 DDay, over 150,000 Allied troops landed on the beaches of Normandy. The operation was a logistical marvel, involving thousands of ships, aircraft, and soldiers. Fierce resistance met the invaders, but eventually, the Allies secured a foothold in France. The liberation of Paris followed in August, and German forces were pushed steadily back toward their own borders. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union launched massive offensives from the east, reclaiming territory and advancing toward Berlin. The pace of the war accelerated, and the collapse of the Third Reich became increasingly inevitable. By April 1945, Soviet forces encircled Berlin. Adolf Hitler, trapped in his underground bunker, chose death over capture, committing suicide on April 30th. Days later, German forces surrendered unconditionally on May 8, 1945, Victory in Europe Day. Yet in the Pacific, fighting continued. Japan, despite being strategically outmatched, refused to surrender. The United States, determined to end the war, resorted to atomic warfare. Hiroshima was destroyed on August 6, 1945, followed by Nagasaki on August 9th. Faced with unprecedented devastation, Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945, bringing World War II to a close. The world emerged from the conflict profoundly changed. Tens of millions had perished, entire cities were leveled, and political maps were redrawn. The horrors of the Holocaust, The atomic bombings and the scale of total war left an indelible mark on human consciousness. New powers, the United States and the Soviet Union, rose to prominence, setting the stage for the Cold War. World War II was not just a clash of armies, but a confrontation of ideologies, ambitions, and human endurance. It revealed both the depths of human cruelty and the capacity for courage and resilience, reshaping the course of history in ways that are still felt today. On September 1, 1939, German troops crossed into Poland, unleashing a swift and overwhelming invasion that marked the official start of World War II. Germany's aggression was the culmination of years of calculated expansion, ideological ambition, and the failures of appeasement by the Western powers. Britain and France, though now standing on the brink of conflict, were still weakened from World War I. Their economies had never fully recovered. Their populations had endured waves of strikes and unrest, and both nations faced the enormous financial and logistical burden of maintaining sprawling overseas empires. Above all, they had been scarred by the catastrophic human losses of the previous war. Successive British leaders Lloyd George, Ramsay MacDonald, and Stanley Baldwin were determined to avoid another large-scale European war, a policy reflected in a reduced peacetime army and minimal rearmament. France, meanwhile, had suffered even heavier casualties during World War I and faced declining birth rates, prompting a defensive military posture focused on the Maginot Line rather than offensive operations. Meanwhile, the world had already witnessed the rise of fascist powers. Italy, under Mussolini, had shown the impotence of the League of Nations when it invaded Abyssinia. Hitler and Mussolini had both tested the resolve of Britain and France during the Spanish Civil War, 1936 to 1939, where they supported Franco's nationalist forces. The conflict was brutal, involving extensive atrocities on both sides, but the democratic powers largely stood aside, adhering to a policy of non-intervention that emboldened the fascists and convinced Hitler that Britain and France would not confront him militarily. Hitler's Germany, meanwhile, had been steadily preparing for expansion. From the moment he became chancellor in 1933, he pursued long-term goals of territorial conquest and the Germanization of Eastern Europe. Germany's military was rebuilt in secret and then openly defied the Treaty of Versailles. The Luftwaffe was re-established, conscription reintroduced, and the army expanded. The reoccupation of the Rhineland in 1936, the annexation of Austria in March 1938, and the seizure of the Sudetenland in September 1938, all achieved with minimal resistance from Britain and France, demonstrated both Hitler's strategic patience and the West's unwillingness to confront him. By March 19, Germany had moved into the remaining Czech lands, establishing the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia, while Slovakia was declared a nominally independent state under German influence. Hitler now set his sights on Poland, demanding the return of the port city of Danzig and the creation of a land corridor linking East Prussia to the rest of Germany. Despite clear warnings from Britain and France that an attack on Poland would trigger war, Hitler calculated that their response would be hesitant and indecisive. At the same time, Stalin, alarmed by Hitler's aggression, attempted negotiations with Britain and France to form an anti-German alliance. These talks faltered, and in a shocking turn on August 23, 1939, the Soviet Union and Germany signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, a non-aggression treaty that secretly divided Poland between them and granted the USSR freedom to occupy the Baltic states. With the Eastern Front secured, Hitler prepared for immediate invasion. On the evening of August 31, 1939, German forces were fully mobilized. Adolf Hitler had made the irrevocable decision that would ignite a global conflict, plunging the world into the deadliest war in human history. In the early hours of September 1, 1939, German forces launched a meticulously coordinated attack on Poland, employing a strategy that would soon be known as Blitzkrieg, or Lightning War. Tanks, mechanized infantry, and dive bombers struck with unprecedented speed, overwhelming Polish defenses before they could fully mobilize. Rail lines and communication hubs were targeted first, isolating units and creating chaos across the country. Within hours, Polish towns and cities were under siege, their streets filled with the smoke of burning buildings and the terrified cries of civilians caught in the path of the assault. The Luftwaffe dominated the skies, strafing roads, railways, and towns, and bombing military installations and civilian centers alike. Polish forces fought valiantly, but they were outmatched both technologically and numerically. Tanks and motorized infantry cut through the countryside, bypassing heavily fortified positions and encircling units before they could retreat. This rapid advance stunned the world. No European army had faced such a concentrated combination of mobility, firepower, and surprise. On September 3rd, true to their promise, Britain and France declared war on Germany. However, their response on the ground was limited. France launched the Saar offensive, a cautious advance into the German frontier, but it stalled quickly against minimal resistance. Britain mobilized its forces, but there was no immediate strike into Germany. This period, later mockingly referred to as the Phony War, or Sitzkrieg, allowed Germany to consolidate its gains and prepare for the next stage of Hitler's campaign. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union invaded eastern Poland on September 17th, in accordance with the secret protocols of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Polish forces were now trapped between two powerful armies, and by the end of the month, Poland had been divided between Germany and the USSR. Cities were occupied, government officials arrested, and the Polish people subjected to harsh military rule. The country had been conquered in a matter of weeks, demonstrating the devastating effectiveness of Blitzkrieg and the deadly consequences of the West's initial inaction. The fall of Poland marked a turning point in European history. It proved that Hitler's ambitions could no longer be contained by diplomacy or appeasement. Germany's combination of speed, coordination, and modern weaponry had decisively outclassed the forces of a traditional nation-state, signaling the start of a new kind of warfare that would sweep across the continent. Within weeks, Hitler's eyes turned westward. Denmark and Norway would soon fall in April 1940, followed by the lightning campaigns against Belgium, the Netherlands, and France in May. The world had entered a new era of total war, one defined not just by armies clashing on battlefields, but by the systematic targeting of entire populations, the use of unprecedented military technology, and the ideological drive of regimes determined to reshape the map of Europe and beyond. The stage was set for a conflict that would engulf every continent, test the limits of human endurance, and leave a legacy of destruction and moral reckoning that would last for generations.